Hello and welcome to the Weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement and military technology, brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Viasat. I'm your host, Richard Thomas, and on the show this week, we look at highlights from the MSPO event held in Poland recently, and we grab a chat with Heron Systems VP for Research about the company's next steps after it won the recent DARPA AlphaDogfight AI trial. But first, it's time to look at some of the headlines from this week. And we start in Japan, where the MOD is considering alternatives to Aegis Ashore for ballistic missile defense, also known as BMD. 3 options are in play. One would see an isolated missile launcher installed at sea or on the Japanese coast. Another is for a large floating BMD platform positioned at sea. And a third would see more BMD-capable Maya-class destroyers built. Departing Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said on 11th of September that the MOD will reach a decision by late December. Meanwhile, in Australia, landmark ground engine tests of the Loyal Wingman UAV took place on the 15th of September, following completion of the first aircraft earlier this year for the Royal Australian Air Force. The Loyal Wingman programme gives Australia the opportunity to explore how to protect and expand the air power of manned aircraft over a range of missions. With the threat from nations such as China and Russia and their highly capable air defences, Western interest is growing in UAV technologies and capabilities to act as decoys, radar jammers and electronic intelligence platforms. In Europe, the German government is investing a further €2.1 billion in the armed forces following the previous funding injection in July. This time the emphasis is on digitalisation, joint direct attack munitions spark bombs for the Air Force and guided missiles for the Navy. For the Army, the overall aim is to be able to field 3 divisions by 2031 that are capable of fighting a high-intensity conflict. And the UK will lead an international training programme for the Ukrainian Navy, which requires new equipment and systems to recover from a period of neglect. Planned exercises may involve Canada, Denmark, Sweden, and possibly the US. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, they will be primarily focused on training naval personnel in navigation, operational planning, diving, naval reconnaissance, fire training, and ship damage control. However, some observers question the value of these plans, given the poor general condition of the Ukrainian fleet. To join the conversation on more defence stories this week, Air Editor Tim Martin and Land Reporter Flávia Camargo-Pereira join us. Welcome both.
Hi, Rich.
Hello.
Hi. So, Tim, let's start from you. You were checking out a Defence Select Committee briefing earlier this week on F-35 and carrier strike.
Yeah, that's right. Some interesting criticisms, I should say, of the F-35 programme were brought to light by defence analysts, including from Justin Bronk, who's a research fellow at RUSI, specifically who looks at combat air power. And one of the things that he raised, I thought, which was particularly interesting, was the ability of the F-35 programme to be built up and readily support not only carrier strike missions, but SEAD operations, and in the future, anything air support for the Army, should that be required further down the line. To put it fairly bluntly, he said that it was a kind of big ask to have the F-35 or do those missions concurrently or at once. So kind of worst case scenarios that the UK is, using the carrier strike, perhaps in China or elsewhere. And there's also a regional dispute, say that SEAD is required or, penetration of our defences are required. If that was to arise in the future, it's unlikely to go off his analysis that the UK would be able to manage both of those through the F-35 programme coherently or effectively. And I think when you hear it put as clinically as that and as bluntly as that, then you kind of do have to think to yourself more about the programme as a whole, more so than some of the funding issues that we kind of talk about. And I suppose we'll talk about whenever the integrated review has been laid out. But certainly that is, from a capability perspective, it was kind of quite a damning appraisal, let's say, of the programme itself. I would also probably mention that on a more positive note, Bronk had a couple of important points to make about the progress that's been made. He fairly happy on the training front and the structure of the programme as a whole, but it's just more so that in terms of being able to build up the capability and how exactly the program's going to work, if it's going to be, as he puts it, double-hatted or triple-hatted in terms of spreading itself over a number of missions. That's a very difficult one for the MOD to square, and certainly he doesn't have any confidence that that if there are multiple missions to be attended to, that the F-35 program will be able to work through them.
Yeah, I caught parts of that session. It was, as you say, it was really interesting, some of the points that Bronk and the other witnesses made. I think one of the issues potentially is a lack of numbers, a lack of quantity. I mean, you're looking at, let's say, 48 committed to so far, isn't it? And you're looking at the bare minimum required at that number for sustaining carrier strikes. So as you say, if you want to add extra missions, multiple missions, then you're going to need a lot more aircraft.
Yeah, I think the numbers is really fascinating because, as you say, 48 contracted. 35 is the exact contracted number. 40, there's an additional 13 which have been approved. So 48 is the number being touted at the moment. But I suppose 18 have been delivered, 17 to come. And then by 2025, you're into having more than 48 or at least having the additional 90 to get the 138 target. And that is over the phrase from the MOD is over the life cycle of the airframe. So, you're talking maybe out to 2050 potentially on that one or beyond. But actually, the most important point that was raised, and again, this was from Bronk himself, was that if there are reduced numbers, but below 138, and if you only have 60, let's say, then there's a whole ream of unintended, unwanted consequences that could bring. Not only would the UK then be considered more of a junior partner on the programme. Remember, it has Tier 1 status because of the 138 commitment. Beyond, there is talk that Japan could have 147 eventually. So, that they would leapfrog the UK. But, if you were to have 60 or something like that, he had said that, in that scenario, then you're talking about the UK being limited over items like weapons integration, sensor integration, and if you wanted to mess around with national mission data file editing, which Israel have, the UK don't at the moment. But all of those kind of benefits that the UK has now and the independence that they have over the programme and the benefits that it has had for such a long time, all of that good work would potentially, go down the drain, or, you'd just have a whole number of difficulties in terms of being able to, have independence over what you're doing. And I think that for decision makers, if there are any difficulties around hitting the 138, which we're led to believe there might be, I think they'll be in for a very hard time, and particularly if, trade media and those looking at the defence review when it comes, if there are significant changes in the F-35 numbers, I think it won't provide the public with any faith in the programme. And as we've seen, there's been a lot of twists and turns on the F-35 programme to this point. So effectively, you've just painted a picture whereby if the UK reduces its lifetime buy of F-35s to whatever 50 or 60 or something like that, then effectively it's no longer that tier 1 partner, that influencer in the program. It just becomes a buyer of a platform then, right? Yeah, more or less. And he was making comparisons with the smaller air forces like Denmark, like the Netherlands, who is optimistic for them, but to be hitting targets of 50 and 60, and then you're in terms of your influence, it's quite reduced. The UK would be behind, as I said, Japan, Australia, and in terms of this whole marrying that whole idea of projecting power and what carrier strike capability in particular offers, then it's almost a mixed message. The whole point of, or one of the main points of integrated review is to assess the position of the UK in the world as well. Don't forget, the carrier strike group is obviously a very important part of that. So if you're reducing numbers, then you're reducing the ability of the carrier strike to be working as effectively as first proposed. You would need 24 aircraft and beyond if you're going to, as some have suggested, even supporting the US in the South China Sea and supporting the naval carriers. And, Rich, that's something you'll know better than I, but that's just kind of one area that could be problematic as things move forward.
Yeah, as you say, we'll just have to wait and hope that the integrated review provides enough money to get this program moving forward and over the line. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see for whenever that's going to be published. Thanks, Tim. Let's move to the land now. Flavia, you worked on a story this week regarding the first BAE Systems AMPV delivery to the US Army. So go for it. Tell us more.
Yeah, the BAE system has delivered a mission command variant to the U.S. Army. The company will hand over more than 450 platforms under the current low-rate initial production contract that was awarded in 2019. Besides the mission command variant, the U.S. Army has ordered other 4 variants: general purpose, mortar carrier, medical evacuation, and medical treatment. And it means the U.S. Army is making progress on its program to replace the M113. The M113 is a long-serving platform that has been used by the U.S. Army since the 60s. In recent decades, it has undergone a number of upgrades and improvements, but including with these upgrades and improvements, the M113 doesn't fit in the Army future plans in terms of capacities.
So what will the AMPV provide that the M113 doesn't or can't?
The AMPV has some capabilities that the M113 does not have. For example, it has better protection, more space inside, modern command and control systems. And according to BAE System, it has built-in growth to add new capabilities as the technology evolves. It can include enhanced power generation for advanced electronics and network connectivity as well.
What sort of, I almost hate to say it because it's almost like a trope question, but what sort of impact has COVID-19 had on the program?
Yeah, initially it caused this 6 months delay in the original delivery plans. At this point, the U.S. Army and BAE System could not provide details about the number of platforms that would be handed over during this year. So at this point, we don't know. But despite this delay, it seems that the program is progressing well. Maybe it records some minor delays in the future, but at this point, it's hard to forecast if the COVID-19 pandemic will have a bigger, a more expressive impact in this program.
So it's a US Army armoured vehicle program that's roughly on time. It's a turn up for the books. Good stuff. Thanks, Flavia. For our listeners, if you'd like to find out more about the stories discussed in this episode, please visit our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. It's also worth mentioning Shephard is offering a 20% discount for annual subscription to premium news. Head over to shepherdmedia.com/subscribe and insert code PN20 to redeem. That's valid until the 30th of September 2020. Coming up next, news editor Ben Vogel is on the line with Shephard's contributor Mikhail Yarotsky to discuss platforms on display at MSPO in Poland last week, one of the few defence exhibitions that managed to go ahead despite the pandemic.
My name is Tom Jesse. I'm the Director of Army Initiatives for Viasat. So what I get excited about is, I just recently retired, so I still have a lot of friends and comrades that are out in the thick of it. And I also have a son who just joined the Army, and he's on his way to becoming an airborne ranger. So I want my fellow soldiers and airmen to have the best technology that they can to do well on the battlefield. And Viasat provides that. And so it keeps me involved with Army aviation. I get to go to the units And it just helps me find out what it is they need and bring that back to Viasat. And then we develop those technologies to help them out. That to me, that's just very exciting.
In Poland, the MSPO event in Kielce went ahead last week. This in itself was an achievement given the widespread cancellation of trade shows this year amid the COVID pandemic. Joining us on the line from Poland to discuss highlights from the event is Michał Jarocki. Hi Michał, how are you?
Hi Ben, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you. Let's dive straight in, shall we? In your view, what emerged as a real highlight from MSPO in terms of new equipment?
Well, actually, there was not as much of brand new equipment itself presented in Kielce during the MSPO, mostly due to the fact that the restrictions put on the exhibitors by the organizers were clear, and they said that the exhibiting companies cannot present any equipment aside from, scale models or something like that. So the only equipment which was shown during the exhibition were weapon systems or vehicles presented by the Polish military or the U.S. Army. For example, for the very first time, the U.S. Army presented here in Kielce in Poland its the launcher for the Patriot air and missile defense system, the very one which Poland decided to procure under the Wisła medium-range AMD program. So this is, although elements of the system were previously presented by Raytheon, this was the first time the launcher itself was presented here. But as I already said, it was presented by the U.S. Army, not the industry, not the exhibitors. In terms of local weapon systems, the Polish Army presented a prototype of a modified Leopard 2 PL main battle tank, which the program is being conducted by the Polish industry in comparison with the German Rheinmetall, and it should lead to modification or modernization of, if I'm correct, 142 MBTs, which should be delivered to the Polish Army in the following years. The Army also presented the first prototype of a modified, not modernized, but modified T-72 MBT, definitely a legacy obsolete platform, which, however, was equipped with some new onboard equipment, some new systems, which will hopefully provide it capable to operate on the modern battlefield for a few years to come. And also a new or a modified version of the Dana 152mm self-propelled howitzer was also presented. This was the first vehicle of this type operated by the Polish Army, which undergone modernization. And this modification program will also cover more of these vehicles of this type as well. So this is pretty much in terms of new, or let's say modernized, modified equipment, which was shown during MSPO. Also a version of the Apache helicopter from Boeing, but the one which is operated by the U.S. Army was also presented, but this wasn't anything new, as this platform was shown during MSPO on many times already. An interesting thing which was presented, but not as a driving vehicle, but a scale model, was a Polonized version of the South Korean K2 Panther MBT. And the reason for the vehicle, for the model to be presented, is that the South Korean company, Rotem, is very much interested in the Polish Wilk program. Wilk translates into wolf in English. This program calls for procurement of, let's say, pretty much 500 new main battle tanks, which should eventually replace the currently operated T-72s, the ones which are currently being modified, but also the PT-91s, let's say a Polish modification variant of the T-72 introduced in the 90s. So these two platforms will have to be replaced, and the K2 PL is one of the most promising offers, and I think something that's definitely should be taken into consideration by the Polish MOD and the Polish Army as a potential future platform.
I see. So there appears to be more contenders joining the Wilk program. You mentioned the Wisla program a little bit earlier in your answer. So it appears on the basis of MSPO that Poland is pushing ahead with a number of different strands of defence equipment procurement. In terms of announcements made during the event, and decisions that were made and publicised, was there anything new from MSPO?
Well, in terms of procurement programs or modernization programs, which are included in the current technical modernization plan of the Polish Armed Forces, the one which was presented in late 2019, nothing changed very much in comparison to, let's say, the previous edition of MSPO. Of course, some of the programs will have to be maybe not stopped, but withheld, and maybe revised in some way. But I think that the major procurement programs, like the aforementioned Wisła program or the Harpia program, which calls for the procurement of 32 F-35 multi-role fighter jets, I think the major programs will continue. Maybe there will be some modifications in terms of a delivery schedule or I don't know, payment schedule for the systems, but they should continue as they're treated by the MOD, by the Polish MOD, as something crucial to the country's defense. I have to admit that this year there was another program which played quite an expensive role. That is the Narvia program. It is similar to the Wisła program, but this one calls for the short-range air missile defense system. A number of companies like MBDA or Rafael from Israel presented their offers for the program. They presented what elements of the system they could provide. They also presented or explained how do they see the cooperation of the Polish industry in providing the other remaining elements of the future AMD system. And so I have to admit that Narew this year was on the highlight, definitely. And I have to say that from my point of view, Narew will be one of the programs which the foreign companies, foreign defense industry will be very much interested in Poland in terms of playing a hand in this project.
So Narew, definitely one to look out for. You mentioned a bit earlier on, Michal, how the show is notable for a US presence, and while that in itself isn't new, the general geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe, with the recent enhanced defence agreement, does seem to show the US drawing closer to Poland with a stronger military alliance. So is it logical to conclude that this is going to translate into more opportunities for US contractors? And did you notice early signs of that this year at MSPO?
Yes, definitely. The first side of this was the fact that despite the pandemic and all those restrictions in traveling all across the Atlantic, which especially affects the U.S. companies and its staff, there were quite a few big players from the U.S. defense industry present in Kielce at MSPO. For example, Lockheed Martin, for example, Bell, Raytheon. These companies, some of their representation was based on their European staff. For example, from Lockheed, most of the staff came from the UK, as the personnel from the US wasn't able to. However, there was one company which managed to send its representatives all across the Atlantic. It was Bell, and there were a few high-ranking representatives from Bell present in Kielce, which came to Europe just a few weeks earlier. So this was quite interesting, and it showed how much the company treats the Polish market, how much the company looks forward to cooperating with the Polish Armed Forces. But to answer your question, yes, I think that the US is very much aware of the fact that Poland treats its good relations, political and military relations with the US, but treats them as a pillar of country's defense, and is very much happy of the fact that U.S. troops are present stationed in Poland, even on rotational basis. But this also translates to the requirement of this interoperability between Polish and American armed forces, at least in some part, at least in, for example, the missile defense systems or fighter jets or land vehicles. Already, U.S. industry has very much benefited from this Polish strategy of keeping good relations between Poland and U.S. So I think that there's a big chance for U.S. companies to have even a stronger input on Poland and Polish procurement programs. For a couple of months now, we've been discussing here in Poland about the possibility of procuring second-hand U.S. Abrams main battle tanks as the replacement to the Polish Soviet-era obsolete vehicles. So this is also being treated as one of the options, not only procuring brand new vehicles like the South Korean K2, but also second-hand ones from the US. So this is one of the examples in which the US industry could also benefit from those close relations between Poland and the US.
There's a case of watch this space for further information. Finally, Michał, listeners from the defence industry may be interested to hear from you what the show was like, as there have been so few events this year due to COVID. I mean, the only other one that I can think of recently is Army 2020 in Russia. So what were your general impressions of the show and in terms of the practicalities of attending a trade show in the middle of a global pandemic?
Well, I have to tell you that until the very end, some of us here weren't so sure about the fact whether the show will actually take place or not, because the final decision was up to the government, and the government could have blocked the show, but luckily it didn't, so the show could take place. Well, first of all, MSPO was extensively smaller in size and in number of exhibitors and number of visitors than what we were used to lately. It was like 1/3, 1/4 of what normally takes place. Also, in terms of visitors, only VIPs, exhibitors, or press could attend the event. So there were no public days. There were no visitors from schools or universities. This was one of the restrictions, which actually, from my point of view, allowed the show to have a more exclusive character and helped us as press, as professionals, to get in touch with representatives from particular companies from particular countries. So it allowed us to schedule a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of seminars or conferences, during which the exhibitors had time and they could an opportunity to provide us with new information regarding what they have to offer or what do they plan to develop in the future. I think that there are some lessons learned which the organizers of other such events could include in their planning and planning of their shows and exhibitions also during this year. And of course, some of the restrictions were very troublesome. For example, you couldn't walk around from one booth to another and present your leaflets or your magazines, just handing over. That wasn't possible. All you could do is to, put your magazines in a special media point where attendees could just pass by and collect them. But it was totally understandable. And if it only allowed us to, safely go through the 2 or 3 day show. So in general terms, it was very good that the show took place. And I hope that other events scheduled for later this year or early next year will actually take place, now having this positive example of what could be done in this difficult times.
So say all of us. Thank you very much, Michał.
Thank you very much.
It's a fairly obvious point, but military equipment is getting increasingly sophisticated, and therefore the requirement to effectively train people not just to use it, but also to fight with that military equipment is becoming increasingly complex and demanding.
The biggest challenge that we have is not only designing and delivering training now for Generation Y, is planning for Generation Z, but the capabilities that we're developing now, when you look at the new Challenger tank or the new Warrior, but think of Type 31 ships, the new Dreadnought submarine, all of those, we need to start thinking about Generation Alpha.
The way we work is changing at a tremendous pace. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed the need to upskill employees whose roles were already being disrupted by the rapid evolution of emerging technologies. Welcome to the Defining the Future podcast, Shephard Studios series on aerospace and defence innovation, sponsored by our partner Raytheon UK, a company invested in Britain, creating British jobs and supporting local communities around the United Kingdom. Over the course of 4 episodes, we will tell the story of how innovation fostered by industry is helping the UK step out of the shadow of Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. We will hear how emerging technologies are supporting the prosperity agenda developed by the government to accelerate Britain's growth in these uncertain times. And we will hear from representatives across industry about how transformation and cutting-edge technologies designed for the military are beginning to reshape the commercial sector. To learn more about how defence innovation is transforming the training sphere, listen to the Defining the Future podcast, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Brett Darcy is the Vice President for Research at Heron Systems, which emerged victorious last month in the DARPA AlphaDogfight trial. Brett, perhaps you could start by giving us a little bit of intro about Heron and about how you got involved in the AlphaDogfight contest.
Sure. So Heron's a small business. We're about 32, 35 employees, something like that right now. Founded in 1997, and we got our start doing test and evaluation of mission systems that were flying in naval aircraft. So we started with the E-2C, moved up into the E-2D, and then since then we've kind of proliferated across a couple other platforms and a couple other missions. And back in 2011, we started a research and development group, and we made what's turned out to be a fateful decision to look at machine learning as our first kind of technology area to get started in. So we were doing basic neural network stuff, looking at something closer to our core history, which was making mission systems on aircraft perform better. In that case, it was a radar system, and we've grown alongside the machine learning field since then, which was fortunate because when the AlphaDogfight trials started to become socialized by DARPA, we were in a pretty good position to go after them. So we put together a proposal in August of 2019. We were invited out to Las Vegas to pitch it live to the DARPA team. And we were fortunate enough to be selected, and the rest is kind of history, right? So we kind of jumped in with 2 feet, put a lot of our key resources toward that program, and we were able to emerge successful.
And obviously, of course, successful completing the dogfight trial and winning the contest against a real live human pilot. What has the response of DARPA been to the result? I mean, it's only a few weeks ago, I know, but in your point of view, were they surprised at all, or not?
So we've come to learn since then that there was it wasn't very surprising that we won to them. Some of them had kind of picked up that we had the potential to win pretty early. But I think it was certainly, as Animal called it, a David versus Goliath story, right? I mean, if I was a betting man back in September of last year when we were just getting started, I would have downplayed our chances for 2 reasons. One, we were a team of 2 people going against teams of 5, 6, 7, 8 people, and 2, our technical approach was pretty risky. So if it worked, there were going to be clear advantages to it. But if it didn't, it was going to end very miserably. There wasn't a lot of middle ground between work or success and failure. We were confident that we had a good idea, but it was risky. And so was DARPA surprised? I don't think so. I think they knew every competitor they chose had put forth a technical approach that was reasonable and was populated by people who could do the work.
Well, it certainly sounds like you surprised yourselves.
No, we have been doing, we use deep reinforcement learning as our core technical approach, and we'd been doing it for a while, so we knew what we were doing. But it was just a question of how successful can it ultimately be, and I think that's what surprised us, is that once we kind of got the hang of what was going to work, we really went forward. I mean, Ben, our lead, engineer on the program, has told people publicly that, we were able to improve our agent by 90% or more every single trial, right? And there was 4 trials throughout. So we were compounding 90% improvement the entire time. And we constantly were surprised that we were able to achieve that, because we thought sooner or later we were going to hit a plateau. And we just never found it during the program. So I think that was the most surprising part.
So clearly there's a lot of potential and a long way perhaps before you do hit that ceiling, if indeed you hit it at all.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at a much more challenging set of scenarios going forward. So we're going to need that improvement potential if we're going to be successful.
Looking ahead, actually, on that note, I don't know if you noticed the comments made by the Secretary of Defense actually last week, Mark Esper, about the DoD wanting to pit an AI algorithm against an actual real-world full-scale tactical aircraft in 2024. Now, that's 4 years away, so a lot of work can be done in that time. But in your point of view, is that a realistic objective?
Yes, it is. It's realistic for the AI. I think it's aggressive for the typical way the DoD goes about building and testing these systems. It made me happy. And I was listening to the SecDef's comments when he made them. We were actually attending, that same virtual conference. And we know that there's a follow-on program at DARPA that along those similar timelines that should happen. But getting a really high-profile endorsement of that timeline and schedule helps the DoD establish the priorities, I think, to really push this technology forward.
So that's a target for 4 years away. But in terms of the near term, what is your next move?
So we are, waiting to hear back to see if we've been selected to perform in the follow-on program. It's called the Air Combat Evolution Program that DARPA is going to be funding. We put in a bid back in April to participate. So we're waiting to hear on that. We're hoping in the very near future to have something we can publicly announce to that end. And then, so assuming that goes forward, then great. We're working also on a couple other initiatives in parallel to investigate the application of this kind of AI in, tactical decision-making spaces, and kind of the key breakthrough there is decision-making on longer timeframes. So that opens up a whole world of possibilities beyond just dogfighting. So
these other applications, are they also for the US Air Force or different branches of the armed services?
Yeah, so we're working a program with the Air Force now, and then we are in discussions in a couple different avenues with other parts of the Air Force and with the United States Navy. And we're looking at things that are less technically risky. So putting AI in an aircraft and having it control the flight of the aircraft is just safety risk. But if we can take these systems and put them into things like trainers or other analysis tools or investigatory tools, we can more immediately transition them into supporting the warfighter. And those are the kind of programs we're really looking to go after in the near term, while we work the 2 or 3 year long research programs to do something that's like the next big steps for the AIs in the sky.
That makes sense, I suppose, not to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. One of the participants in the AlphaDogfight event was Lockheed Martin. Obviously the big tier one contractor, whereas you're almost at the opposite end of the scale, so to speak. Have you been talking to Lockheed or any one of the big defence contractors about teaming up to develop future applications, get their kind of weight behind what you're doing?
Yeah, we definitely have. We had ongoing. We've had an ongoing relationship with Northrop Grumman for some other stuff. Actually, in a way, I don't remember the exact order of events, but Northrop had definitely, turned us on to the whole idea of this air combat evolution program, and that there was going to be the AlphaDogfight trials. I think we might have heard something before we had that conversation with them, but they kind of reached out and said, "Hey, the work you guys are doing could fit well there. You guys should go after that or take a look at it." So we were working with them past, since the trials, though. I think their interest has perked up a little bit, understandably, I think. And then, I've had an initial conversation with the person at Lockheed who kind of led their AlphaDogfight trials and some of their AI programs. No real, just kind of preliminary stuff at that point. And, Boeing also reached out. We're trying to schedule something there. So, we're talking with them. There's nothing, super concrete, right? It's kind of early days. But I think to kind of get at the heart of your question, yeah, they have technologies, specifically assets. They have platforms and sensors and access to other programs that they've already captured that could be an enticing help for us. Now, whether or not it makes sense for them to play nice or try to compete is ultimately their question. But we do like our position as a smaller company who can innovate very quickly. We can focus on the task at hand. I think we've demonstrated that with a relatively small pool of money, we can make significant progress. And I would hope for their return on investment type calculations, they would recognize that value.
And of course, as a small disruptive business, you're looking for funding sources, I imagine, that will enable you to help take the air combat evolution work that you're doing and the other projects that you mentioned, help take them forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. I wouldn't say we're necessarily looking for funding. It's one of those questions where events have kind of overwhelmed our company. We were small. We're a family business. We were founded not to be $1 billion company. We were founded because our founder didn't want to stop writing software. He wanted to control his own technical destiny, so to speak. And also we wanted to have a company that, was a good company to work for. And we've always kind of prided ourselves on that. And it's meant having smaller ambitions than we normally, most companies would have, right? We were not your traditional startup that was trying to, on a mission to conquer the world. But now we have some opportunities placed in front of us that, us as a corporate leadership team have to sit down and examine, kind of rationally and say, all right, well, what do we want to do going forward here? And, those conversations are ongoing. And certainly the idea of having capital at hand in order to push the technology forward as fast as we can and starting to form it and fit it into products versus just contracted research on behalf of DARPA is a serious discussion that we're having to have.
That's probably looking ahead a few steps after the one that you're taking in the immediate future, I expect.
Right. The nice thing is we can work in parallel here. We don't have to, there's no funding gun over our head. I'm not going to have to lay off people here in the next years. We're growing right now, pretty insanely for us. We'll be 100% larger next year than we already were this year. So, and that's just unfunded programs already. That's no business development based on our AlphaDogfight success. So,
and while you evolve and develop, are you also in discussions with not just with the contractors and not just with DARPA, but are you also communicating with air forces and militaries outside the US? I'm thinking particularly in terms of NATO to explore the potential of what you're doing.
Nothing direct. There's a program we're working that has kind of some interest from an ally. I can't disclose it, but it's something where we're involved in in programs that are looking that direction. In terms of looking at NATO allies directly or anything we're doing directly, I am the single source of all business development activity and also, managerial, executive management of all of our research programs. So I have a bit of a full plate. I've had to be a little more targeted in where I'm looking. So, of course, as a busy person, I've gone with what's familiar.
I can't blame you.
Not that I wouldn't encourage, erstwhile partners to reach out, but no, I have not engaged directly. It's on my list of things to start trying to do. It's to start looking at non-traditional sources to see what could be done. So,
just finally, Brett, the Pentagon has defined AI as the top technology modernization priority. That's a matter of record, and the DoD Chief Information Officer has come out and said that. So you're very much aligning with this kind of thinking at the top of the Pentagon. But there is the whole issue of the ethical dimension of AI has kind of been getting a little bit more attention from the DoD as well. I don't know if you noticed a few months ago there was the development of a particular ethical code for AI operations that the DoD came up with. To what extent is awareness of that code filtering into the industry that works with with AI?
Yeah. We kind of call that the legal, moral, ethical. I call it the legal, moral, ethical thing. And it's hard for me to directly engage with it because where we are in terms of developing the technology now is still just trying to understand what it can do and how it could be applied to the warfighting case, right? Ultimately, kind of where I fall on that is my job as a technologist is to build these systems well. And that includes making sure they're trusted. And trust in this case is trusted to both perform adequately, but also to perform as intended. And if we can make sure that we are developing systems that both perform adequately and perform as intended in all circumstances, then ultimately when people who are not us, right, we are not as a company going to ever make the operational decisions, right? We're not going to make the acquisition decision that says, or the strategic decision that says, our future force is going to use these systems to accomplish X, Y, and Z missions and operationally apply the lethal technology following these standards. That's just not something we're going to do. That's going to be requirements placed upon us, not requirements that we develop. What we can control, though, is given that set of requirements, can we ensure that the AI will always do what is asked of it? And I think that's really important. And so to the extent that we even have the legal, moral, ethical stuff on our, on the front of mind, it is really looking at trust and assured autonomy and things like that, right? So are you able to deliver 100% of the time exactly what's intended? And that's certainly at the forefront of every program we're working right now. So, I guess that's an indirect way of saying we're aware of it, but it's not really our job to really worry about it. Our only indirectly, right? So I think that's kind of where we are. I would like to be in a position where we have to worry about it because that means you've been very successful and we have some serious traction and it's looking real. But maybe, 3-4 years from now, maybe that'll be the case. Right now, we're just still kind of pure technologists.
Brett Darcy, thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
This episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Viasat. As always, a big thanks for everyone who took the time in being a part of the episode. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also start a conversation or give us feedback joining the Global Defence Community Group on LinkedIn, a platform to interact with our team of journalists and analysts and discuss breaking news as it happens. Head over to shepherdmedia.com/Global Defence Community or search Global Defence Community on LinkedIn to join. Until next week, thanks for listening.